and continue the pattern of insanity that's been going on for quite a few generations with no resolution and no justice. Because you can't talk about justice or judicial process without talking jurisdiction. That's a fact. Now, there was a question that you were looking at, Dr. Nair?
So, yeah, I'm just kind of going through. I'm trying to, okay. Someone wants to know how you feel about the funding of the policy enforcers. I saw that.
I would take a position, not how I feel about it, but I'll make a statement on it.
Okay.
The persons that are known as policy enforcers, that some people have been calling them, are members. So let's talk. One of the things that when we talk about jurisdiction, we need to start talking about proper person and proper terms of who and what you're talking about. So when they're talking about policy enforcers, they're actually talking about an organized body of for-profit, sometimes calling themselves not-for-profit, religious organization and a political platform known as the Fraternal Order of Police, who are actually commercial mercenaries in contract with the subdivisional franchisees of the United States Service Corporation Company, which is bankrupt, to enforce unum sanctum policies against the people of the land under international occupational forces, and have been falsely calling themselves law officers and are not sanctioned by treaty nor by constitution to operate on the land. Now you answer the question for yourself.
So from a standpoint of,
they should have never been funded in the
should
first
have
place.
our
Not by law, they shouldn't have
the
been funded.
sheriffs are the,
Of course, that's why they don't talk about sheriffs or Sharifian law, which is constitutional law. You know, so I mean, this stuff is not hard to research, but you know, once you start thinking for yourself, you can see the corruption. And the deal of it is, while discussing it, we need to be cognizant of the different jurisdictions that arise within the structure of the conversations relative to people's rights, their liberties, their estates, and their trusts. And understand that all operations in government come under trust law too. The treaties come under trust law. Constitution comes under trust law. Why is it that these people who are in these positions of trust, they're claiming positions? See, now you want to understand jurisdiction again. There are some people who are in position of trust who are legitimate. Problem: the majority of them are illegitimately claiming jurisdictional powers that not only don't belong to them, were never vested in them. And it has not been in their interest to tell the truth. This is again why some of the criminal operators have a problem, and this is back to the question earlier with Donald J. Trump. If you understand trust law and you understand treaties and constitutional principles and jurisdiction that involve every one of them, you would not be caught up in prejudice arguments, stupid arguments, pro or con concerning Donald Trump, but you'd be simply looking at the facts and recognize that in principle, you know, you take it all with a grain of salt. But in principles of law, in fact, Donald Trump is better than the entire membership of the Democratic Party of the Knights of Columbus Ku Klux Klan wrapped together in a royal package of doo-doo dung with ribbons.
now that's not what's being
We know that
displayed and promoted by the MSM and all of, you know, everything, the BLM, the ANTIFA, and all of these things that are trying to get us to.
It's indicative that they're doing that, and that, again, like I said
the
before,
entertainment world and all of the media and all everybody.
I'll say this, and this is why you have to qualify, because people are ignorant of jurisdiction. And I always have to qualify it. I say, I'm not defending Donald Trump. I will present the facts and let you see them for yourselves. However, if people don't understand jurisdiction, which they've been demonstrating.
Yep.
They've been following the mainstream narrative to their against their own interest and don't know it, that they're voluntarily creating voluntary jurisdictions that were actually they were led into deceptively.
Who is they?
Our people, particularly. That's the Aboriginal people of the land, most of whom don't know that they're Aboriginal to the land, which is also a mental political jurisdiction that's operative. And this is back to solutions. You get no solutions and you get no justice nor remedy with the people who are claiming to have or requesting or commanding or demanding a preservation of rights when they don't know or comprehend jurisdictional issues, when they're arguing the nature of jurisdictional issues without knowing that that's what they're arguing. And then they contradict what they themselves are asking for or asking to address when they mix it with another false jurisdiction within the venue of that argument, not knowing what they're talking about, talking from an emotional perspective rather than the facts. So if they don't understand in personam jurisdiction, they're not going to operate from that position. 9 times out of 10, their words are going to contradict. Their requests are going to contradict. They're going to fail to exercise a right because they will know that they have a right. Then they would give leave to an enemy of their rights through the Barristers Association in the quest for claiming a right, which indicates their leader guys have not been teaching jurisdiction. Now, that's correct, because if they understood jurisdiction, which we're trying to address, and this is minimal, a lot of the questions that are asked really were already answered, and these people would answer themselves. But I guarantee you this too, a lot less time would be wasted on what you call circular motions, or people going around in circles trying to solve problems because they will discover for themselves that their concepts are wrong.
Good question. Yusuf 7 says, Islam, Grand Sheik Taj, through all your years of being in the movement, what are some of the things that you've seen that has yielded what the Prophet was bringing back, i.e. lifting up humanity, civics, etc.?
Let's look at the questionnaire. When it said, how did the Prophet begin to uplift the Moorish Americans? Answer, by teaching them to be themselves. Now, when you say that, then you do some research. You also made this statement continuously. Go back to that state of mind of your ancient mothers and fathers. When you do, you will discover that organized government known as civics were actually taught to the rest of the world by the Moors, your forefathers. And those fundamental rules that many of you have accredited to others are actually your own organized governmental sciences, etc. And once you understand jurisdiction, you would understand what Jurali was saying. And you would also understand and comprehend why, and what was the nature of why was, and this would be a question and also a statement for you to consider in relationship to your question. Do you notice how, like, in the Moorish Holy Temple of Science, in the Moorish Science Temple of America, and the old Canaanite temple, when you know the real history of the Moorish Divine and National Movement under the guidance of the illustrious Prophet Nobudrali, he would mention Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and he would be called, Garvey would be referred to as the forerunner. And often you would hear people even refer to people in the Garvey movement, and also in people who are part of the operations of the Moorish Holy Temple of Science. They will be referred to loosely as Garveyites. And so this is a fact. Do some research. And so then you'll recognize when you do research that the Moorish Holy Temple of Science was registered as a civic organization. But you'll see a lot of people among whom these questions might arise will never state that fact to the people because they don't want them to look at civics and recognize that there's been some breaches along the way as to why even these questions that should have been answered decades ago are asked today, which they should be asked, because they would be self-evident. And you would see that the people would be recognizing that these were political jurisdictions that were constructed in order to execute and to propagate fundamental principled information that was needed and necessary for the people to be uplifted socially, economically, and politically. And you'll see also, for those of you who have done some research, you will see that the prophet Noble made this statement along this line. And then you can examine that statement and then examine your question and also examine my response to that question. He said, if you don't believe that the programs that I have for the redemption of my people and the citizens are correct, go to those who know law. Examine what I just said, then go back to your question, then go back to some of the things I've been telling you right now, and you will answer your own question. Plus, you'll answer it for a lot of other people.
He's also asking what you've seen over your years of, what the prophet said.
This is what I see. I see the resistance, or what you call.
Matter of fact, if you go back before you go there, you've seen. There was a time when you talk about you were able to send people over to with your signature and get things changed and so forth and corrected and so forth. From that point when you were doing that to where we are now with all this, I mean, how did you get to that point where there was an acceptance?
Number one, sincerity and organized activity. That's what did it. That was mainly Grace Hill. Sincerity and organized activities. And of course, instructions, not unlike what we do at the House of Reawakening Minds on multiple levels, which comprises more science. It's not, people's concept of more sciences has been constricted. So when they're looking at more science, a lot of people, it doesn't dawn on them that it's metaphysics.
Right.
It doesn't dawn on them that it's Reiki. It doesn't dawn on them that it's proper eating. It doesn't dawn on them that it's cosmology. It doesn't dawn on them that it's liberal arts. It doesn't dawn on them that it's etymology. It doesn't dawn on them that it's epistemology. It doesn't dawn on them that it's philology. It doesn't dawn on them that it's architecture. Because they've been told that it's a religious prayer. And so the mind is constricted. But Moorish science is actually cosmological science, a knowledge of the elements of the earth, knowledge of the plant life, a knowledge of metrology, how cities on the earth plane is laid out based on the stars, which are cosmological, even all the symbolisms, etc. The activation of the glandular system of the body, the evolutionary development and activation of these systems that also have a reflective, or what people would call ethereal level, that also is kind of falsely referred to as the spiritual level. That's more science. And then we could go on and on and on. But many of the people keep thinking that it's a belief system. And I understand, because that's the way many people have falsely presented. But again, I'll say this again. If we, just like the prophet said in relationship to this Moors, he says, if I could just get you all thinking again, you'd save yourselves. The subject matter of jurisdiction is to try to, again, and this is redundant, to get our people thinking, because most of the questions that rightfully arise and have arisen rightfully would be self-evident answer. And it's sort of like until one begins to really study the different aspects of life and organized government, you can't appreciate it till you see it for yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is again why I brought up the subject of jurisprudence and jurisdiction, because I recognize and know that it affects every part of our lives, and it's a broad import, but yet you'll see so many areas where people who have been erudite in many disciplines have come on different venues, and particularly in these late years, and it's becoming known around the world, you know, because you already know you have fan base in China, Japan, Honduras, Ecuador, Borican, Dominica, Haiti, etc., and the UK, you know, Canada. So we have, you know that there are people that's in other nation states, jurisdictions that are listening, and this has been it's become, meaning that the House of
Netherlands.
Yes, the House of Reawakening Minds has become known around the world for bringing different people on, not constricting in some kind of tunnel vision venue, and in the process is liberating the people. Those principles, just and not unlike what the prophet said. Go back to those principles of your ancient mothers and fathers. He says, I've given you more than enough to save yourselves. Now go out and redeem your people. And all of us are always coming short. We're trying, but we come short. But I will honestly say this, and it's not with bias, it's only with truth. I'm just grateful to be a part of the House of Reawakening Minds, which has proven over the years to be a venue where free thought is not constricted, so that people with broad minds, thinkers, researchers, scholars, true doctors, which means teacher, really, in the different disciplines of Moorish science, because Moorish science is actually organized civil government as well as spiritual instruction. All of it together is Moorish science in cosmology. Including the fact that there's people been reaching out to you from many venues who would not even think about going to other venues that many of us have been involved in, knowing that those venues are constricted. Right. I'm saying, and this is not in defense of, it's just being honest. The House of Reawakening Minds, for me, in real analysis, represents the nature of free thought venue that is needed to help uplift the people, because you cannot restrict thinking if you're going to liberate the people. You cannot constrict people thinking if you're going to have people evolve mentally and thus spiritually. You cannot be restrictive. You've got to be open-minded. You've got to have the multiple levels of information available to the people in all the disciplines that affect the human condition. And with all due respect, the House of Reawakening Minds, with all of our shortcomings and flaws, has at least met that grade. And I ain't patting you on the back, I'm just telling you the truth.
It was not me, it's all the people that do that. So I appreciate you, and appreciate you because you've been a integral rather, and very foundational part of what is going on here. So much respect to you. Let me see if there are any more questions. The bank, okay. The bank of, someone wants to know, what's up? The Bank of Atmarian, can you speak on the bank and give us some information on how things are going to be done, if you would? Thank you.
First, with the question, present the aspects of the Bank of Atmari that they're making reference to.
You asking me?
Yes, I'm for the person who's asking that question.
Can you speak on I guess they're just asking if you could explain what it is and what it means, I guess, to our people. I mean, I've seen some things with regard to the brother that transitioned.
Yeah, we
Uriel.
know. Yes, Israel. Yeah.
So I was thinking, but
Uriel has come to our classes in New York.
Right.
Now, of course, you already know this is what would be considered in law, in legitimacy, a legitimate banking operation by true Americans.
Okay.
Now, if you want to look at the details on any activity that would be presented to the people, then you would measure by aspects of Moorish history, whether they're dealing with the cosmological nature of the true culture, dealing with gold, silver, true commerce, etc., or whether or not we would be dealing with a conditional compromission, knowing that we're under political occupation by the Jesuit order in these jurisdictions, which we're talking jurisdiction. And then you would answer that question yourself.
I mean, there are others that I know have tried and or are trying.
Which all of us are doing on multiple levels.
To do various and sundry.
And this is very important, because this is important, and the question is important because now it necessitates us in the quest for correcting and bringing justice and honor and integrity back into the social political platforms. You're dealing with jurisdictions. Because now we also know that while we're in transition, and these are things that are happening also with Donald Trump, etc., which we told about for the last 5 to 7 years, telling people that the nations of the earth were going to stop buying U.S. Treasury bonds.
I can attest to
and
that.
that you're going to have a feedback loop. And we're telling people to take their fiat, not their money. They don't have money. They need to. This is back to why we did the fiat, issue. We have to get our people really understanding jurisdiction, because you have aggregate and then you have abstract. As an example, people get into the discussion of banking, then not understanding really the jurisdiction of the fact that they themselves are a bank.
Yeah, because you could.
No, I'm just saying, really comprehending that. You can say that and you hear people repeat that. But if you ask them to put on paper the explanation of it, they would have to show you beginnings, endings, limitations, and issues of jurisdiction. Because now you have limits of jurisdiction because you're interchanging with other people who also have entities that have instrumentalities that cross jurisdictions, and all of them are mixed between valid and invalid. And as a matter of fact, most of anything that's even valid in law are more recent activities with people who are buying and selling, or what you would call trading for silver and gold. Fact, aggregate silver and gold. And or dealing with specified jurisdictional instrumentality that have actually numerical reference in exchange for gold and silver coinage, etc., which is by law the money. Now, when you get out of that jurisdiction, now you're getting into what has been the problem, and that is private commercial paper who people, even in the name of consciousness, keep calling money, and they just corrupted the whole argument. They don't, here we go. Why are we doing this? They continue to demonstrate that they don't understand jurisdiction. And all I'm saying is, again, in addition to that, the subject matter tonight is to get us to start changing our language, because that's part of fixing it. Are we clear? And the question is vital, is very important, etc. Why? Because even in the process of trying to fix these things, right? People who are sincerely working to fix these things are still in the trap of colorable jurisdictions. What you must do is make those distinctions while you're working these problems out, and cognitively at all times make that distinction so you can measure even your progress and the people's competence in setting up or restoring the principles of international trade and commerce that superseded hybrid European colonial operations, particularly of the Western Hemisphere, after 1492, etc., under the Spanish Inquisition operations against the Moors, which again is why we're dealing with this color of law operations. And people have lost cognizance of jurisdictional platforms and what jurisdiction means and the limitations of jurisdictions. And thus, in the process, have been constantly tricked into signing things, affirming things, allowing what you call appearances of voluntary jurisdiction, thereby consenting to false jurisdictions and thus fiat platforms and fiat instrumentality, and getting robbed in the process, which is back to what we're talking about and what we're dealing with now, including the question about the banking. You're talking about jurisdictions. And so as we clear these matters up, and as we get these people to start studying these details, even children, younger children, will start working out problems just by understanding the different levels and aspects of jurisdiction, and logically, which comes under jurisprudence. And again, they'll understand why Drew Ali set up the Moorish Temple of Science as a civic organization, 1925, 6, 7, 8. And as you can see, that last tail end, that's when they really amped up the infiltration and the operations to overthrow Noble Drew Ali and the Moorish Divine National Movement. This is called the period of the Great Sellout that people get uncomfortable talking about. However, what you find is that the civic platform of the movement, which deals with jurisdiction, was infiltrated and overthrown. And that's an honest, true fact. And it needs to be looked at, not with finding fault with people, just need to look at the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. And you also have jurisdictional facts. You need to understand jurisdictional facts. Let me bring that to you from a point of law. Jurisdictional facts. Jurisdictional facts are those matters of fact which must exist before a court can properly take jurisdiction of the particular of the defendant, etc., has been properly served with process, and that the amount in controversy exceeds a certain sum, that the parties, which logically must be identified, and or the citizens of different states, etc., and that also the of jurisdictions, must be addressed and affirmed for the record. So that's jurisdictional facts. So now when you're talking about the old Canaanite temple, then you're talking about the Moorish Temple of Science, also known as the Moorish Holy Temple of Science. Then you talk about the corporate name, which was adopted in 1928, known as the Moorish Science Temple of America. You're talking about adjustments of a constructed political jurisdiction in civics and in philosophical dispensation known as religion, etc., in different aspects of time and jurisdictional activity, etc., determining exercises of powers and authority, which would be demonstrated in Act 1 of the Divine Constitutional Law, bylaws of the Moorish Science Temple, which says the chairman, moderator, and chairman are put in power to make law, right, and enforce law if he lives according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, and it is known before the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America. That is what? A political jurisdiction. And that's a civic act. So jurisdiction must be comprehended, mustn't it?
Yes. So
now we're still going back to even the question relative to Noble Drew Ali helping to uplift the Moorish Americans. That's a political act under civics and jurisdiction at the same time. And when you're talking nationality and birthrights, now you're talking about estate jurisdictions. Now that's a fact. How many of these people understand estate law and understand now you're getting into trusts? That's not opinion, that's fact.